In Cedar Falls, Wisconsin, a 58-year-old divorced librarian was about to defy her entire family. What started as creating her first online dating profile took a shocking turn when she fell for the one man she couldn't have. Margaret Kowalski wasn't your typical empty nester. For 25 years, she had sacrificed her identity for family, known for always putting others first. When she met David Matthews through a message about books, she had no idea he was her children's boss at the paper mill. Maggie chose forbidden love that would ignite a workplace scandal, forcing her to choose between family loyalty and personal happiness in small-town Wisconsin. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain drummed against the kitchen window with the persistence of a woodpecker, each drop catching the amber glow from the overhead light. Maggie Kowalski sat alone at her oak dining table, the same table where she'd served thousands of family dinners, helped with homework, and signed permission slips. Now it felt cavernous, designed for a family that no longer existed in the way it once had. Her laptop screen glowed expectantly, the cursor blinking in the empty text box under About Me. She'd been staring at it for 20 minutes, her coffee growing cold in the mug that read, "World's Greatest Mom," a Mother's Day gift from Jake when he was 12. The irony wasn't lost on her. What do you write when you've forgotten who you are? 6 months. That's how long it had been since the divorce papers were signed, since Robert moved out to start his new life with Stephanie, his 28-year-old dental hygienist. 6 months of learning to cook for one, of talking to herself just to hear a voice in the house, of falling asleep to late-night television instead of Robert's familiar snoring. The dating website, Silver Connections, .com, had seemed like a joke when Rita first suggested it 3 weeks ago. "Maggie, honey, you can't just sit in that house and wither away like some Victorian widow," Rita had said over coffee at the library. "You're 58, not 88, and you're still beautiful, even if that bastard ex-husband of yours was too stupid to see it." Rita Nowak had always been the bold one, even back in high school when they'd first become friends. Widowed 5 years ago, she'd navigated the world of online dating with the confidence of a seasoned general commanding troops. She made it sound so simple. Create a profile, post a photo, wait for the messages to pour in. But sitting here now, Maggie felt like she was preparing to expose her soul to strangers. Who was Margaret Kowalski beyond the roles that had defined her for 25 years? Wife, mother, helper, supporter, always someone something, never just herself. Her phone buzzed against the table, Rita's name flashing on the screen. "Please tell me you're not just staring at that blank screen like a deer in headlights." Rita's voice carried its usual mixture of affection and exasperation. "I don't know what to write," Maggie admitted, tucking the phone between her ear and shoulder. 25 years of marriage, and I honestly can't remember what I liked to do before Robert, before the kids, before all of this. Start. Simple. What makes you happy right now? Today. Maggie looked around her kitchen, taking inventory of her solitary life. "Books," she said finally. "I love reading again. I forgot how much I missed getting lost in a good story. And I like my job at the library more than I thought I would. Helping people find exactly what they're looking for. There's something satisfying about that." "See? That's a start. What else?" "I've been gardening. Remember how Robert always said my flower beds were a waste of time? Well, this spring I planted whatever I wanted. Wildflowers, herbs, things that smell good and attract butterflies." She surprised herself with the warmth in her voice. "And I've been cooking differently, trying recipes I always wanted to make but knew he wouldn't eat." "Now you're talking. Put all of that in there. Show them the real Maggie, the one who's been hiding under all those years of being what everyone else needed." After they hung up, Maggie began to type, her fingers finding a rhythm she hadn't expected. After years of putting everyone else, First, I'm rediscovering the woman I used to be, and the woman I'm becoming. I'm a librarian who believes books are medicine for the soul. I grow wildflowers that make my neighbors wonder if I've lost my mind. I haven't. I've found it. I cook with too much garlic and laugh at my own jokes. I'm learning that starting over at 58 isn't a consolation prize. It's a gift. She paused, reading her words. They sounded confident, hopeful, like someone she might actually want to know. The photo selection proved easier than expected. She scrolled through her phone, past family pictures where she stood on the periphery, past awkward selfies, until she found it. A candid shot from the library's holiday party last December. She was laughing at something Janet from circulation had said, her eyes bright, her genuine smile transforming her face. In that moment, she looked like herself. Not Robert's wife or anyone's mother, just Maggie. She uploaded the photo and clicked Create Profile before she could second-guess herself. The rain had softened to a gentle patter when her laptop chimed with a notification. Her first message. Her heart hammered as she clicked the envelope icon. Your profile caught my attention, not just because you're beautiful, but because you write about books like they're old friends. I'm David, and I believe anyone who thinks wildflowers are better than manicured lawns understands something essential about life. What book is on your nightstand right now? Maggie read the message twice, then a third time. No crude comments about her appearance. No obvious copy-and-paste flattery. Just a genuine question from someone who'd actually read what she'd written. She was composing her response when the kitchen door burst open with the familiar rattle of loose hinges. Jake's voice preceded him into the room. Hey, Mom, I was driving by and saw your light. Panic shot through her system like ice water. Her hands moved faster than her brain, slamming the laptop shut with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the suddenly too quiet kitchen. Jake! She hoped her voice sounded normal, not like someone who'd just been caught doing something illicit. You scared me half to death. Her youngest son stood in the doorway, water dripping from his work jacket onto her ceramic tiles. At 26, Jake still had the lanky frame and easy smile that had made him the family charmer, though she'd noticed new lines around his eyes lately. The paper mill was hard work, and she worried he wasn't taking care of himself. Sorry, Mom. Didn't mean to startle you. His gaze flicked to the closed laptop, then back to her face. What you working on? Something for the library? Just organizing some files, she said, the lie tasting bitter on her tongue. She'd never been good at deception, especially with her children. Are you hungry? I could make you a sandwich. Nah, I already ate. But he moved toward the refrigerator anyway, the way he always did when he was thinking something through. You know, Mom, you seem different lately. Good different, he added. Quickly when her eyebrows rose. More. I don't know. More like yourself. The observation caught her off guard. Jake had always been more perceptive than his siblings gave him credit for, but she hadn't realized her changes were so visible. Maybe I am, she said carefully. Is that okay with you? Yeah, of course. He pulled out a beer, popped it open, and leaned against the counter. I just want you to be happy. We all do. Do you? She wondered, but didn't say. Because if that were true, why did she feel like she had to hide a simple dating profile? Why did the thought of her children knowing she was looking for companionship make her feel like a teenager sneaking out after curfew? I should probably head home, Jake said after finishing half his beer. Early shift tomorrow. But Mom? He paused at the door, something serious flickering across his usually light-hearted expression. You know you can tell me anything, right? I'm not a kid anymore. After he left, Maggie sat in the quiet kitchen for a long time, listening to the rain and the hum of the refrigerator. The laptop remained closed, David's message waiting for her response. Outside, the world continued its evening rituals. Porch, Lights flickering on, families settling in for the night, the comfortable routines of small-town life. But inside her house, something had shifted. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt the stirring of possibility. She opened the laptop again, David's message still glowing on the screen, and began to type her reply. The cursor blinked, with infinite patience, waiting for her to decide who she was going to be next. Maggie's fingers still tingled from closing the laptop so abruptly the night before. Jake's unexpected visit had rattled her more than she cared to admit, but not enough to stop her from responding to David's message about books. They'd exchanged 3 more thoughtful messages since then, each one making her smile in a way she'd almost forgotten was possible. She was rearranging the fiction section at the library on Friday afternoon when Sarah appeared between the stacks, her face tight with the expression Maggie recognized as barely controlled panic. "Mom, we need to talk." Sarah's voice carried the forced calm she used when trying to manage a crisis at the Mills administrative office. "Of course, honey. What's wrong?" Maggie slid another novel into place, not immediately grasping the gravity in her daughter's tone. "Not here. Tommy wants to see you. At his house. Now." The book slipped from Maggie's hands, hitting the floor with a soft thud. "Tommy wants to see me? On a Friday afternoon? What's this about?" Sarah's eyes darted around the library, checking for listening ears. "Just, please come, Mom. We'll explain everything." The 20-minute drive to Tommy's house felt like an eternity. Sarah remained unusually quiet, responding to Maggie's questions with non-committal murmurs that only heightened her anxiety. When they pulled into the familiar driveway, Maggie noticed Jake's battered pickup truck already parked behind Tommy's sedan. All 3 of them, together, without their families. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Whatever this was about, it was serious enough to warrant a coordinated effort from her children. Tommy's living room felt smaller than usual with all 4 of them crowded into it. Linda was conspicuously absent, sent upstairs with the kids, Maggie assumed. Tommy sat rigidly in his recliner, the patriarch's chair, while Sarah perched nervously on the edge of the couch. Jake sprawled in his usual spot on the floor, but his typical easy demeanor was replaced by uncomfortable tension. "Sit down, Mom," Tommy said, gesturing to the remaining chair. His tone carried the authority he used as shift supervisor at the mill, and it immediately set Maggie's teeth on edge. "I'd rather stand, thank you." She crossed her arms, a defensive gesture she hadn't used since her children were teenagers. "What's this about?" Sarah cleared her throat, her diplomatic instincts kicking in. "Mom, we found something, on your phone, when you asked me to help you with those photos from the library's book club last week." The blood drained from Maggie's face. She'd been so careful, but she'd forgotten about the browser history, the saved passwords, the automatic logins that made technology both convenient and treacherous. "You went through my phone?" Her voice rose higher than she intended. "We weren't snooping," Sarah said quickly. "It just opened automatically when I was trying to find the photos. And we saw the dating website." Tommy leaned forward, his face flushed with the righteous anger that had defined his personality since childhood. "Mom, what the hell are you thinking? Online dating? At your age? At my age?" The words came out like a slap. "What exactly is wrong with my age, Thomas?" "Don't Thomas me. You're 58 years old. You've got 3 grown children and 2 grandchildren. People in this town know you. They know us. What do you think they're going to say when they find out Margaret Kowalski is trolling the internet for men?" The casual cruelty of his words, trolling for men, hit her like a physical blow. But beneath the hurt, something else stirred. Something that felt dangerously like rage. "I think," Maggie said, her voice dropping to the deadly calm she'd perfected during her marriage to Robert, "that what I do with my personal life is none of your business." Jake shifted uncomfortably on the, "Flirty's a mom, we're just worried about you. There are a lot of creeps online. Guys who prey on vulnerable women." Vulnerable? The word tasted bitter. "Is that what you think I am? Some pathetic, desperate woman who can't take care of herself?" "That's not what we meant," Sarah started. "That's exactly what you meant." Maggie's composure cracked. 25 years of suppressed frustration spilling out. "You want me to be the grieving ex-wife forever. The devoted grandmother who bakes cookies and babysits and never, ever thinks about her own happiness." Tommy stood up, his 6-foot frame towering over her in a way that might have intimidated her 6 months ago. Now it just made her angrier. "Your own happiness? What about our happiness? What about how this affects us? Do you know what people at the mill are already saying? Jerry Kowalski's ex-wife looking for action online. It's embarrassing." Jerry Kowalski's ex-wife? The repetition of her former identity, always defined by her relationship to someone else, was the final straw. "I have a name, Tommy. I am a person beyond my relationship to your father or to any of you." "You're our mother," he shot back. "That doesn't just stop because you decide to have some kind of midlife crisis." "Midlife crisis?" Maggie laughed, but there was no humor in it. "God forbid a woman should want companionship. God forbid she should want someone to talk to at the end of the day, someone to share a meal with, someone who might actually be interested in what she thinks about something other than your work schedules and your children's soccer games." Sarah was crying now, the tears she always shed when family conflicts escalated beyond her ability to mediate. "Mom, we just don't want you to get hurt. Online dating is dangerous. People lie about who they are. They take advantage." "Like, your father took advantage of me for 25 years? The room fell silent. Even Jake, who'd been unusually quiet throughout the confrontation, looked up from his spot on the floor. "That's different," Tommy said finally. "Dad was. Dad made mistakes. But at least he was someone we knew. Someone from our community. Someone who promised to love and honor me, then left me for a woman half my age." Maggie's voice shook with emotions she'd kept buried for months. "If that's the kind of judgment you trust, then maybe your opinion about my dating life isn't as valuable as you think it is." Tommy's face went red. "So what? You're just going to throw away your reputation? Our reputation? Start acting like some desperate—" "Tommy." Jake's voice cut through his brother's tirade with unexpected firmness. "Stop." Everyone turned to look at the youngest Kowalski, who'd pushed himself up from the floor and was staring at his older brother with something that looked like disgust. "Stop what?" Tommy demanded. "Stop talking to Mom like she's property. Like, her only value is how she reflects on us." Jake's voice was quiet but steady. "She's not dead, Tommy. She's not even old. And maybe if we'd been paying attention to how lonely she's been instead of just expecting her to keep making Sunday dinners and babysitting whenever we need her, this wouldn't be such a shock." The truth of Jake's words hung in the air like smoke. Maggie stared at her youngest son, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time as an adult with his own opinions and insights. "Jake," Sarah said softly, "we're just trying to protect her." "From what? From being happy?" Jake shook his head. "From finding someone who actually gives a damn about what she wants instead of just what she can do for them?" Tommy's jaw worked like he was chewing nails. "This conversation isn't over." "Yes," Maggie said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "It is. I am 58 years old. I have raised 3 children, survived a divorce, and rebuilt my life from scratch. I am perfectly capable of deciding who I want to spend my time with." She moved toward the door, then turned back to face all 3 of her children. "I love you, all of you. But I am done living my life according to your expectations and your fears. I spent 25 years being who your father needed me to be. I will not spend the rest of my life being who you need me to be. The drive home felt like an escape. Sarah had offered to follow her, but Maggie declined, needing the solitude to process what had just happened. She'd never spoken to her children like that before, had never felt the need to defend her right to exist as an individual, rather than just a mother. At home, she opened her laptop and found another message from David waiting for her. A photo. This time, him standing in front of a bookshelf, holding up a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice with a note, "Thought you might appreciate a man who isn't afraid to admit he loves Jane Austen." For the first time since the confrontation with her children, Maggie smiled. She began typing her response, her fingers steady and sure. Whatever came next, she was going to face it as herself. Not as Jerry Kowalski's ex-wife. Not as Tommy, Sarah, and Jake's mother, just as Maggie. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The rain had started again, drumming against the windows like applause. The confrontation with her children had left Maggie feeling raw, but also strangely liberated. When David suggested meeting for coffee at Murphy's Diner, she didn't hesitate to say yes. Now, sitting in her car outside the familiar red brick building, she questioned everything. Her hands trembled as she checked her reflection in the rearview mirror. She'd chosen a simple blue sweater that Rita said brought out her eyes, and minimal, makeup that hopefully suggested confidence rather than desperation. Her phone buzzed. "I'm here. Booth by the window. Take your time." The consideration in those words steadied her nerves. She gathered her purse and stepped into the crisp October air. Murphy's Diner had been a Cedar Falls institution since the 1960s, its red vinyl booths and checkered floor unchanged since Maggie's high school days. The familiar smell of coffee and bacon grease enveloped her as she pushed through the glass door. She spotted him immediately. David Matthews sat in the corner booth, but his presence transformed the familiar space into something entirely new. He was taller than she'd expected, with graying hair that suggested distinguished rather than old, and kind eyes that found hers the moment she entered. He stood as she approached. Actually stood, a gesture Robert had abandoned years into their marriage. "Maggie." "That's me." Heat rose in her cheeks. "You must be David." "Guilty as charged." His smile reached his eyes, creating lines that spoke of frequent laughter. "Thank you for meeting me. I was nervous you might change your mind." "I almost did," she admitted, sliding into the booth. "About 3 times between my car and your table." His laugh was warm and genuine. "Well, I'm glad you fought through the nerves. Can I get you some coffee?" Fair warning, Murphy's coffee could wake the dead, but it tastes like motor oil. Motor oil it is. I've been drinking Murphy's coffee since high school. Jenny Morrison, who'd graduated with Sarah, poured their coffee with undisguised curiosity. Maggie could practically see the gossip forming, Margaret Kowalski having coffee with a stranger. "So," David said once Jenny retreated, "I have a confession. I may have done some light research on you." Maggie's stomach dropped. "Research?" "Nothing invasive. Just asked around about the town librarian. Wanted to make sure you were real." His expression grew serious. "I hope that doesn't bother you. This is new territory for me, too." "What did you find out?" "That you're beloved by everyone who's needed help finding a book. That you single-handedly saved the library from budget cuts. That you make the best chocolate chip cookies in 3 counties. He paused, voice softening. "And that you've been through a difficult time recently, but you're handling it with more grace than most people could manage." The kindness in his words threatened to undo her completely. She blinked back tears, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug. "I'm sorry. I'm not usually this emotional. It's just been a while since someone said anything that nice about me." "Then people haven't been paying attention." The simple statement, delivered without flourish, hit harder than any elaborate compliment. She found herself really looking at him. The way he held his coffee cup, the patience in his expression, the absence of wandering eyes that had characterized other men during her divorce. "Tell me about yourself," she said. "What brought you to Cedar Falls?" Something flickered across his features, a shadow there and gone. "Work, mostly. I took a position here a few months ago. Seemed like a good place for a fresh start." Fresh start. I understand that feeling. Do you? What does a fresh start look like for you? The question caught her off guard. I'm not sure yet. For so long, my life was about being what other people needed. A good wife, mother, daughter-in-law. I'm still figuring out what being just me looks like. And what have you discovered? That I like spicy food more than I thought. Robert couldn't handle anything stronger than black pepper, so I cooked everything bland for 25 years. Last week I made curry so hot it made me cry, and it was the most delicious thing I'd eaten in decades. David's laughter was infectious. What else? I like staying up late reading without someone telling me to turn off the light. I like planting flowers that serve no purpose except being beautiful. I like having conversations about books instead of schedules and bills. She paused, surprised by her honesty. I like feeling like my thoughts matter to someone. They do matter, at least to me. They talked for 2 hours without pause, conversation flowing from books to movies to old noir films. David told her about Milwaukee, his decision to leave, city life, his struggle to find meaning after loss. Maggie shared things she'd never told anyone, her secret dream of writing a novel, her love of gardening, her fear that she'd failed at her most important relationships. You didn't fail, David said. Sometimes relationships end not because someone failed, but because people grow in different directions. Is that what happened with your marriage? No. Ours ended because life is cruel and unpredictable. My wife died 3 years ago. Cancer. But we were happy right up until the end. I'm grateful for that. His grace in speaking about loss made something shift in Maggie's chest. Here was a man who'd faced devastating grief and chosen to keep living, keep hoping. Can I ask you something? David said as Jenny refilled their cups. Why online dating? Because everyone here knew me as Robert's wife for 25 years. They have expectations about who I should be. Online, I could just be myself. And what happened when you tried? My children staged an intervention yesterday, told me I was too old for dating, that I was embarrassing the family. David's expression darkened. That's ridiculous. You have every right to seek happiness, companionship, love, whatever you want. I'd like to see you again, he said as they prepared to leave. If you're willing to risk another scandalous coffee date. I'd like that too. Outside, David walked her to her car, the October air crisp with winter's promise. Thank you for giving me a chance, he said, leaning down to kiss her cheek, a gentle gesture that sent warmth through her entire body. As she drove home, Maggie found herself smiling, humming along to the radio, feeling more alive than she had in months. It wasn't until she reached her driveway that she realized they'd never discussed what David did for work. 3 weeks had passed since that first coffee date, and Maggie felt like she was living a double life. By day, she worked at the library, endured tense family dinners, and navigated the careful civility her children maintained after their confrontation. By evening, she exchanged messages with David, their conversations growing deeper and more intimate with each passing day. They'd met twice more for coffee in neighboring towns, carefully avoiding Cedar Falls' gossip network. Each meeting left Maggie feeling more connected to him, more hopeful about the possibility of genuine companionship. David was everything Robert hadn't been in years. Attentive, curious about her thoughts, genuinely interested in her dreams and fears. Today felt different, though. Special. David had mentioned he was swamped with work meetings, so Maggie had impulsively decided to surprise him with lunch. She'd prepared his favorite sandwich, turkey and Swiss with the spicy mustard he'd mentioned loving, and driven to the address he'd given her for his office. The Cedar Falls paper mill loomed. Before her, its brick smokestacks reaching toward the overcast November sky like fingers. She'd driven past the complex countless times over the years, but had never really paid attention to the administrative building tucked behind the main production facility. The parking lot was busy with the lunch hour shift change, workers in hard hats streaming toward the cafeteria while others headed to their cars. Maggie parked near the administrative entrance, smoothing her skirt and checking her reflection one more time. The surprise lunch felt bold, romantic even, the kind of gesture the old Maggie would never have considered. But the woman she was, becoming the woman David saw when he looked at her, was capable of such spontaneity. The receptionist, a young woman with bright pink nail polish, looked up from her computer with a practiced smile. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see David Matthews," Maggie said, lifting the brown paper bag containing his lunch. "I don't have an appointment, but I was hoping to surprise him." "Oh!" The receptionist's eyes lit up with recognition. "You must be his lunch date. He mentioned he might have a visitor today. Just take the elevator to the 3rd floor. His office is at the end of the hall. The nameplate says, Mill Manager." Mill Manager. The words hit Maggie like ice water. She nodded mechanically, thanked the receptionist, and walked toward the elevator on legs that suddenly felt unsteady. Mill Manager. David was the mill manager, the man her children worked for, the man who controlled their livelihoods, their futures, their job security. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor felt eternal. Each floor that passed brought a new wave of realization about the complexity of what she'd stumbled into. No wonder David had been vague about his work, mentioning only that he'd taken a position in Cedar Falls. No wonder he'd seemed familiar with the town's dynamics despite being new. The hallway was quiet, most employees apparently at lunch. Maggie walked toward the end of the corridor, her footsteps muffled by institutional carpeting. Through the glass wall of the corner office, she could see him, David, her David, sitting behind a large oak desk, phone pressed to his ear, papers spread before him. The nameplate beside his door read, David Matthews, Mill Manager, in bold black letters. She stood frozen outside his office, watching him work, trying to reconcile the man she'd been falling for with the reality of who he was in her children's lives. He was their boss, the person who approved their schedules, their raises, their vacation requests, the man who held their professional futures in his hands. David looked up and saw her through the glass. His face transformed with a smile that would have warmed her heart under any other circumstances. He held up one finger, just a minute, and quickly ended his phone call. "Maggie." He stood and opened his office door, his expression shifting to concern as he took in her pale complexion. "What a wonderful surprise. Come in, please." She stepped into his office, noting the framed degrees on the wall, the industry awards, the photos of mill operations. This was David's world, the world where her children worked, where their paychecks were signed, where their professional lives were decided. "I brought you lunch," she said weakly, holding up the brown bag like a shield between them. "That's incredibly thoughtful." David closed the door behind her and gestured to the chairs in front of his desk. "Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I didn't know," she said simply. "You're the mill manager." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by something that looked like regret. "Maggie, I can explain. My children work here." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "All 3 of them. Tommy's a shift supervisor, Sarah works in administration, Jake's in maintenance. You're their boss." David ran a hand through his hair, the gesture she'd found endearing now seeming like evidence of his deception. I know. I figured it out. About a week ago when I was reviewing personnel files. Kowalski isn't exactly a common name in Cedar Falls. A week ago? You've known for a week and didn't tell me? I wanted to tell you in person. I was trying to figure out how to bring it up without, he gestured helplessly between them, without this. This look on your face like I've betrayed you. Haven't you? The words came out sharper than she intended. David, do you understand what this means? My children already think I'm making a fool of myself. When they find out, I'm dating their boss. When they find out you're dating a man who cares about you, David interrupted. A man who thinks you're remarkable and wants to make you happy. It's not that simple. Maggie sank into one of the chairs, the lunch bag falling forgotten to her lap. This isn't just about us anymore. This affects their jobs, their security. Tommy has a mortgage and 2 kids. Sarah's trying to get pregnant and can't afford to lose her health insurance. Jake? She stopped, overwhelmed by the complexity of it all. David came around his desk and knelt beside her chair, his hands covering hers. Maggie, look at me. Please. She met his eyes, seeing the sincerity she'd fallen for, but also the professional authority that made him her children's superior. I would never ever use my position to hurt your family. I would never let our relationship affect how I treat them at work. You have to believe that. I do believe that, she said, and she did. But David, it doesn't matter what we believe. What matters is how it looks. What matters is that they're going to think you're taking advantage of me, or that I'm trying to influence their working conditions through you, or that 2 adults found each other and fell in love despite the complications. The word hung between them like a bridge neither had dared to cross before. Love. Was that what this was? This feeling of connection, of possibility, of coming alive again after years of merely existing. Is that what this is? She asked softly. I think it might be, David said. For me, it is. And that's exactly why we need to figure this out together, not let other people's fears and assumptions tear us apart. Before Maggie could respond, there was a sharp knock on the office door. Through the glass wall, she could see Sarah standing in the hallway, a folder in her hands and a confused expression on her face as she recognized her mother's profile. The blood drained from Maggie's face. Sarah. David stood quickly, professional composure sliding back into place. I'll handle this. But it was too late. Sarah had already seen them together, seen the intimate way David had been kneeling beside her mother's chair, seen the obvious familiarity between them. Understanding dawned on Sarah's face, followed by shock, then something that looked like panic. David opened the door. Sarah, come in. We need to talk. Sarah stepped into the office, her eyes darting between her mother and her boss. Mom? What are you doing here and why? She stopped, the pieces falling into place. Oh my God, David. You're David. The man from the dating site. Sarah, Maggie started, but her daughter held up a hand. This is who you've been seeing? Mr. Matthews? Our manager? Sarah's voice rose with each word, the careful composure she maintained at work cracking under the weight of personal crisis. It's not what you think, David began. It's exactly what I think, Sarah said, backing toward the door. You're dating my mother. You're my boss, and you're dating my mother. The implications hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was about to consume everything Maggie had built. Her newfound happiness, her relationship with her children, the delicate balance of her new life. Sarah, please, Maggie said, standing and moving toward her daughter. Let us explain. But Sarah was already shaking her head, her face pale with the shock of discovery. I have to think about this. I can't deal with this right now. She turned and fled, leaving Maggie and David alone in the office with the wreckage of their secret and the certain knowledge that nothing would ever be the same again. Sarah's discovery had shattered the illusion that Maggie and David could keep their relationship simple and separate from the complexities of Cedar Falls. For 3 days after the confrontation in David's office, Sarah avoided her mother's calls, responding only with terse text messages. Need time to think. Please, respect that. The silence from her daughter was agony, but it also forced a decision that Maggie and David had been avoiding. They couldn't pretend the complications didn't exist, but they also couldn't pretend their feelings would simply disappear because the situation was difficult. We have 2 choices, David had said when they finally talked through the implications. We can end this now before it gets more complicated, or we can be very, very careful about how we proceed. Maggie had looked at him across Rita's kitchen table, neutral territory that had become their refuge, and realized she wasn't ready to walk away. Not from the first man in decades who made her feel seen, valued, desired for who she was rather than what she could provide. Careful how? She'd asked. Discretion, complete separation of our personal and professional lives, and absolute transparency with your children when the time is right. That had been 2 weeks ago. Now they existed in a strange twilight of secrecy, meeting at Rita's house, taking drives to neighboring towns, careful to avoid any public places where Cedar Falls gossip might spot them together. Tonight, they sat on Rita's back porch, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the November sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. Rita had tactfully disappeared into her house after serving them dinner, giving them the privacy they couldn't find anywhere else. "This is ridiculous," Maggie said, more to herself than to David. "I'm 58 years old, hiding from my own children like a teenager sneaking around behind her parents' backs." David reached for her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I know it's not ideal, but some things are worth protecting while they're still fragile." "Is that what we are? Fragile? Aren't we?" His question was gentle, without defensiveness. 3 months ago, neither of us imagined we'd be here. We're both learning how to trust again, how to let someone else matter this much. That feels pretty fragile to me. He was right, and Maggie hated that he was right. Every conversation they had, every touch, every moment of connection felt precious precisely because she'd thought she'd never have any of it again. The vulnerability was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. "Sarah's been watching me at work," David said quietly. "I can feel her evaluating every interaction, every decision that affects her brothers. She's looking for evidence that I'm showing favoritism or that our relationship is influencing my professional judgment. And is it? Honestly, I'm probably harder on your kids than I am on other employees, just to avoid any appearance of impropriety. Tommy submitted a request for overtime last week that I would have approved for anyone else, but I made him resubmit it with additional justification." Maggie sighed. "This isn't fair to any of us. Not to you, not to them, not to me." "Life rarely is fair," David said, "but that doesn't mean we stop trying to find happiness where we can." The sound of a car door slamming in Rita's driveway made them both freeze. Through the house, they could hear Rita's voice, surprised and welcoming. "Jake, what brings you by, honey?" Maggie's heart hammered against her ribs. Jake's voice carried clearly through the evening air. "Hey, Mrs. Nowak. I was looking for Mom. Her car's here and she wasn't answering her phone." "She's just out back," Rita said, and Maggie could hear the careful neutrality in her friend's voice. "Getting some fresh air." Footsteps approached the back door. David squeezed Maggie's hand once, then released it, shifting slightly away from her on the porch swing. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a betrayal of what they were trying to build together. Jake appeared in the doorway, his work clothes dusty from his maintenance shift. His eyes took in the scene, his mother and David sitting together on the porch, the wine glasses, the intimate atmosphere that no amount of sudden distance could disguise. "Well," Jake said after a long moment. This explains a few things. Maggie stood up, her legs unsteady. Jake, I can explain. Actually, Jake said, stepping fully onto the porch, I think I've got it figured out. You're the mysterious David that Tommy and Sarah have been freaking out about. And you're our new manager. He looked between them with something that might have been amusement. Mom, your timing is either really terrible or absolutely perfect. It's complicated, Maggie said weakly. I bet it is. Jake settled into Rita's wicker chair, clearly not planning to leave anytime soon. So, how long has this been going on? David cleared his throat. Jake, I want you to know that whatever is happening between your mother and me has absolutely no bearing on— Relax, boss, Jake interrupted. I'm not here to threaten you or demand explanations about workplace ethics. I'm here because Tommy's been driving himself crazy trying to figure out why Mom seems so happy lately, and Sarah's been weird and jumpy for 2 weeks. I figured there had to be a man involved. And you're okay with that? Maggie asked, surprised by her son's calm demeanor. Jake shrugged. Mom, you've been miserable for years. Dad treated you like crap, and then he left you for someone barely older than Sarah. If you found someone who makes you smile the way you've been smiling lately, then good for you. The simple acceptance in his words brought tears to Maggie's eyes. Your siblings don't see it that way. Tommy's scared of change, and Sarah's scared of conflict. They'll come around. Jake studied David with the directness Maggie remembered from his childhood. The question is whether this guy is worth the drama he's about to cause. I hope so, David said steadily. I think your mother is remarkable, and I'd like the chance to prove that I'm worthy of her time and attention. Fair enough. Jake stood up, brushing off his jeans. But just so we're clear, if you hurt her, I know where you work, where you live, and exactly which pieces of mill equipment could make your life very difficult. Despite the threat, Jake's tone was almost cheerful. David actually smiled. Understood. After Jake left, Maggie and David sat in silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. The secret was expanding beyond their control, one family member at a time. Soon, there would be no secret left to keep. He likes you, Maggie said. Finally. Think so? He threatened you with industrial sabotage. For Jake, that's practically a blessing. David laughed, pulling her closer on the swing. 1 down, 2 to go? It won't be that easy with Tommy and Sarah. I know. David pressed a kiss to the top of her head. But we'll figure it out. Together. The word together sent warmth through Maggie's chest, even as she wondered how long they could maintain this precarious balance between secrecy and truth, between her growing feelings and her family's expectations. In the distance, the mill's evening whistle blew, signaling the end of another shift. Soon, they would have to leave Rita's sanctuary and return to their separate lives, their careful charade of casual acquaintance. But for now, in the gathering, darkness, they could simply be themselves. 2 people who had found each other against the odds and were determined not to let fear or convention tear them apart. 2 months of secrecy had taken its toll on both of them. The stolen moments at Rita's house, the careful avoidance of public spaces, the constant vigilance required to keep their relationship hidden, it all felt unsustainable. Maggie found herself exhausted by the dual life she was leading, while David struggled with the ethics of dating an employee's mother while maintaining professional boundaries. But it had also deepened their connection in ways Maggie hadn't expected. When every moment together was precious and hard-won, when every conversation had to carry the weight of all the things they couldn't say in public, their relationship had developed an intensity that surprised them both. Tonight felt different. David had been quiet during dinner at Rita's house, distracted in a way that made Maggie wonder if he was finally ready to end things. The complications were mounting. Tommy had started asking pointed questions about why the new manager seemed to know so much about the Kowalski family dynamics, and Sarah remained distant and troubled, caught between keeping her mother's secret and her own discomfort with the situation. Rita had excused herself early, claiming fatigue but winking at Maggie in a way that suggested she knew more about David's plans than she was letting on. Now they sat in Rita's living room, the fireplace casting dancing shadows on the walls, and David seemed to be gathering courage for something. "Maggie," he said finally, turning to face her on the sofa, "we need to talk about where this is going." Her heart sank. Here it was, the conversation she'd been dreading, the careful, kind explanation about why their relationship couldn't continue, why the complications outweighed the connection they'd found. "I know," she said quietly. "It's getting harder to keep this secret, and it's not fair to you, having to constantly worry about how every professional decision affects my family." "That's not what I meant." David reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew something small. "I meant we need to talk about making this official." Maggie's breath caught as she recognized the small velvet box in his hands. "David, what are you? I'm asking you to marry me." The words came out in a rush, as if he'd been holding them back for weeks. "I know it's crazy. I know we've only been together for 2 months, and I know the timing is terrible. But Maggie, I love you." The box opened to reveal a simple, elegant ring, a vintage setting with a diamond that caught the firelight and threw it back in brilliant sparks. But it was the expression on David's face that took her breath away, the vulnerability and hope and absolute certainty in his eyes. "This was Ellen's ring," he said softly. "I had it reset, made it new, because this isn't about replacing what I had before. This is about choosing to love again, choosing to build something new." Maggie stared at the ring, her mind reeling. Marriage. After everything that had happened with Robert, after the bitter divorce and the long, lonely months of rebuilding, her life, the idea of marriage felt both terrifying and impossibly wonderful. "David, She struggled to find words. "Are you sure? Really sure? Because once we do this, once we make this public, there's no going back to keeping things simple." "I don't want simple," he said, taking her hands in his. "I want complicated and messy and real. I want Sunday morning coffee and arguments about the thermostat and someone to come home to at the end of every day. I want to wake up next to you for whatever time we have left. My children are going to lose their minds. Probably. But they'll also see that their mother is happy, truly happy, maybe for the first time in years. And eventually, if we're patient, and if we do this right, they'll understand that love doesn't have an expiration date." Maggie looked at the ring, then at David's face, seeing past the complications to the simple truth underneath. She loved him. Against all odds, despite all the practical reasons why it was a terrible idea, she had fallen completely in love with this kind, patient man who saw her as she truly was. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, I'll marry you." David's smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and Maggie felt something settle into place inside her chest. A rightness she hadn't felt since she was young and believed in fairy tales. When they broke apart, reality crashed back in. "How do we do this?" Maggie asked. "Do we tell my children first? Do we make some kind of announcement? Do we wait?" "We don't wait," David said firmly. "Waiting gives other people time to talk us out of it, time to convince us that what we feel isn't real or isn't worth the complications it might cause." "So what do you suggest?" "City Hall, next week, Rita as our witness." David's voice grew more confident as he outlined his plan. "We get married first, establish that this is real and permanent, and then we face whatever comes next as a united front." The idea was scandalous and romantic and absolutely terrifying. A courthouse wedding with no fanfare, no family drama, no opportunity for anyone to interfere. Just the two of them, making a commitment and trusting that love would be enough to weather whatever storms followed. What about your job? What about... I've been thinking about that too. David took her hands, his thumb stroking over the new ring. I'll arrange a meeting with HR. Disclose the relationship officially. We'll establish clear protocols to ensure there's no conflict of interest. And if the company decides my personal life makes my position untenable, then I'll find another job. David, you can't give up your career for me. I'm not giving it up for you. I'm choosing you over a job. There's a difference. His voice was steady, certain. I've had a successful career, Maggie. I've proven what I needed to prove professionally. But I've never had another chance at the kind of love we've found. I won't risk losing that for anything. The certainty in his voice, the absolute commitment to their future together, made something break open inside Maggie's chest. For 25 years, she'd been married to a man who saw her as convenient, useful, but ultimately replaceable. Now, she was looking at a man who was willing to rearrange his entire life rather than risk losing her. When? She asked. Friday, 2 o'clock. Judge Morrison owes me a favor from when I helped expedite some permits for the mill. This Friday? As in 4 days from now? Unless you want a longer engagement. David's eyes twinkled with something that might have been mischief. Though I should warn you, I'm not good at keeping secrets, and I'm finding it harder and harder to pretend I'm not completely in love with you. Maggie looked down at the ring on her finger, then back at David's face. In 4 days, she would be married again. In 4 days, she would have to face her children and the community and explain how she'd gone from online dating to marriage in the span of 2 months. The old Maggie would have been terrified. The old Maggie would have insisted on longer engagements, family meetings, careful planning to minimize conflict. But the woman she was becoming, the woman David saw when he looked at her, was ready to leap. Friday it is, she said, and sealed her fate with a kiss. Friday afternoon at City Hall had been surprisingly simple. Judge Morrison performed the brief ceremony with Rita beaming beside them as their witness. Maggie wore a simple navy dress she'd bought that morning, and David had brought her a small bouquet of wildflowers, the kind she grew in her garden, the kind that made her neighbors wonder if she'd lost her mind. Now, 3 hours later, they stood in Maggie's kitchen preparing dinner for her children, the new wedding ring feeling foreign and wonderful on her finger. They'd decided to tell the family together, as a united front, but Maggie's hands shook as she set the table for 5. They're going to think we've lost our minds, she said for the 10th time, adjusting the silverware that was already perfectly straight. We probably have, David replied, wrapping his arms around her from behind. But it's the best kind of crazy. The sound of cars in the driveway made them both freeze. Through the window, Maggie could see Tommy's sedan pulling in behind Sarah's compact car. Jake's truck was already there. He'd arrived early, ostensibly to help with dinner, but really to provide moral support. Showtime, David murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. The kitchen filled quickly with the familiar chaos of a Kowalski family gathering. Tommy entered first, still in his work clothes, his expression already suspicious as he took in David's presence. Sarah followed, her face carefully neutral in the way that meant she was preparing for the worst. Jake brought up the rear, carrying a 6-pack of beer and wearing the slightly manic grin he got when he was nervous. "Mom," Tommy said without preamble, "why is Mr. Matthews here?" "Sit down, all of you," Maggie said, her voice steadier than she felt. "David and I have something to tell you." "Oh, God," Sarah whispered, sinking into her chair. "You're not... Please. Tell me you're not..." "We're married," David said simply, taking Maggie's hand. The ring caught the overhead light, impossible to miss. The silence that followed was deafening. Tommy's face went through several shades of red before settling on a color that reminded Maggie uncomfortably of raw hamburger. Sarah stared at their joined hands as if she could make the ring disappear through sheer force of will. Only Jake seemed unsurprised, though he let out a low whistle. "Married," Tommy repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "You got married. To our boss. Without telling us." "We wanted to tell you together," Maggie began, but Tommy was already standing, his chair scraping against the linoleum. "Are you out of your mind?" His voice rose with each word. "Do you have any idea what you've done? What this looks like?" "It looks like your mother fell in love," David said calmly, but Maggie could feel the tension in his grip on her hand. "It looks like you took advantage of a vulnerable woman going through a difficult time," Tommy shot back. "It looks like you're using your position to—" "Stop." Maggie's voice cut through Tommy's tirade with surprising force. "Don't you dare suggest that I'm too weak or too stupid to make my own decisions. That's not what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant. You think I'm some pathetic divorcee who can't tell the difference between genuine affection and manipulation." Maggie stood, meeting her son's angry gaze. "You think I'm so desperate for attention that I'd fall for the first man who showed interest. I think you're making decisions based on loneliness instead of logic," Tommy said. "And I think he's taking advantage of that." "How?" David's voice was steady but had an edge that made everyone look at him. "How exactly am I taking advantage? By caring about her opinion? By asking about her day? By treating her like an intelligent, desirable woman instead of just somebody's mother?" "By putting our jobs at risk," Sarah said quietly, speaking for the first time since the announcement. "By creating a situation where our professional lives are tied to our family drama." "Your jobs aren't at risk," David said firmly. "I would never—" "You can't promise that," Sarah interrupted, tears starting to flow. "What happens when you two have a fight? What happens if this doesn't work out? What happens to us?" The raw fear in her daughter's voice hit Maggie like a physical blow. Sarah, who'd always been the peacemaker, who'd sacrificed her own needs to keep the family functioning, was terrified that her mother's happiness would cost her everything she'd worked for. "Sarah, honey." "No, Mom. You don't get to honey me out of this. Do you understand what you've done? Tommy's got a mortgage and 2 kids. I'm trying to get pregnant, and I can't afford to lose my health insurance. Jake's finally getting his life together, and now what?" Jake interrupted, his voice sharper than anyone had ever heard it. "Now you're going to blame Mom for my problems too?" Sarah turned to her youngest brother, surprised by his tone. "That's not what I meant." "Yes, it is. You're all acting like Mom getting married is some kind of personal attack on us." Jake stood up, his usual laid-back demeanor replaced by something harder. "Like she's not allowed to be happy because it might be inconvenient for us." "It's not about convenience," Tommy said. "It's about responsibility. It's about thinking through consequences before making impulsive decisions." "Impulsive?" Maggie's voice rose again. "I'm 58 years old. I've spent 30 years being responsible, thinking through consequences, putting everyone else's needs before my own. When exactly do I get to be impulsive? When do I get to choose my own happiness?" "When it doesn't affect other people," Tommy shot back. "Everything affects other people." Maggie exploded, months of suppressed frustration pouring out. "Every choice, every decision, every breath we take affects someone else. But that doesn't mean we stop living our own lives." "So this is living." Tommy gestured wildly between her and David. "Sneaking around, lying to your family, marrying someone you barely know." "I know him better than I knew your father after 25 years of marriage," Maggie said, the words coming out harder than she'd intended. "David listens when I talk. He cares about what I think. He makes me feel like I matter for something other than what I can do for other people." The kitchen fell silent again, But this time the quiet was heavy with years of unspoken truths. Tommy's face had gone pale, and Sarah was crying harder now, not just from fear but from the recognition of how little they'd considered their mother's emotional needs. "I love him," Maggie said simply, "and he loves me. And I'm sorry if that complicates your lives, but I won't apologize for choosing to be happy." "What about us?" Sarah whispered. "What about our family?" "You'll always be my children," Maggie said, her voice breaking. "But you're adults now. You have your own lives, your own families. I raised you to be independent, to make your own choices. Now I'm asking you to let me do the same." Tommy looked between his mother and David, his anger slowly giving way to something that might have been understanding. "I need some air," he said finally, and walked out the back door. Sarah followed him, leaving Jake alone with the newlyweds in the sudden quiet of the kitchen. "Well," Jake said after a moment, "that went better than I expected." Despite everything, Maggie found herself laughing, a slightly hysterical sound that contained equal parts relief and terror. David squeezed her hand, and she realized that, whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. Outside, she could hear Tommy and Sarah's voices, muffled but intense. The real conversations, the ones that would determine whether her family could accept her new reality, were just beginning. By Monday morning, news of Maggie and David's marriage had spread through Cedar Falls like spilled coffee, dark, bitter, and impossible to contain. The mill's break room buzzed with whispered conversations that stopped whenever any member of the Kowalski family entered. Maggie felt the weight of curious stares during her morning shift at the library, patrons lingering longer than necessary as they checked out books, hoping to glean some detail about the scandalous romance. David had arrived at work early, knowing he needed to address the situation head-on before rumors completely overtook reality. His first call was to HR, formally disclosing his marriage and requesting a meeting to establish protocols that would protect both his position and the Kowalski siblings' employment. At 8 a.m. sharp, he called Tommy into his office. Tommy entered with the rigid posture of a man preparing for battle, his face set in the carefully neutral expression he used when dealing with difficult customers or equipment failures. He sat across from David's desk like he was facing a tribunal. "I want to make something clear from the start," David began, his voice carrying the professional authority that had served him well in 20 years of management. "What happened between your mother and me will never, under any circumstances, affect your employment here. Not your position, not your opportunities for advancement, not your job security." "Easy to say now," Tommy replied, his jaw tight. "What happens when the honeymoon period ends? What happens when Mom decides she made a mistake? Then I'll deal with my personal problems like any other adult, on my own time, away from this office." David leaned forward. "Tommy, I understand why you're angry. If someone married my mother under these circumstances, I'd have questions too. But I need you to understand something. I didn't pursue your mother knowing who she was. The connection between you and her wasn't part of some calculated plan. So it's just a coincidence that you ended up with the mother of 3 of your employees. It's Cedar Falls," David said simply. "Population 12,000. Everyone's connected to everyone somehow. The question isn't whether it's complicated. It's whether we handle the complications like professionals." Tommy was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against his knee. "She seems happy," he said finally, the admission seeming to cost him something. "She is happy, and so am I. I still think you're both crazy. Probably, but that's not really your concern as my employee, is it?" The boundary was clearly drawn, and Tommy recognized it. He nodded curtly and left, but David noticed his shoulders had lost some of their tension. Sarah's meeting was more difficult. She entered his office with red-rimmed eyes and the careful composure of someone who'd spent the weekend crying. Unlike Tommy's confrontational energy, Sarah radiated quiet desperation. I don't know how to do this, she said without preamble. I don't know how to work for someone who's married to my mother. I keep thinking about every interaction we've had, wondering if you were thinking about her, wondering if everything I've accomplished here is somehow connected to— Stop. David's voice was gentle but firm. Sarah, look at me. Really look at me. She raised her eyes reluctantly. I didn't know who you were when I hired you. I didn't know who your mother was when I started falling for her. Your work here, your promotions, your responsibilities, the respect you've earned from your colleagues, that's all yours. It has nothing to do with Maggie. But now it does, Sarah whispered. Now every decision you make about me will be scrutinized. People will wonder if I'm getting special treatment or if I'm being punished for family drama. I can't win. David recognized the impossible position Sarah found herself in, caught between personal loyalty and professional identity, between supporting her mother and protecting her career. It was a complexity he hadn't fully considered when he'd proposed to Maggie. What if we established some formal protocols? He suggested. Clear guidelines about how family relationships are handled professionally. Documentation for every decision that affects you or your brothers. Complete transparency with HR. Would that even work? I don't know, David admitted, but I'm willing to try whatever makes this situation workable for you. Your mother loves you, Sarah. She's terrified that choosing her own happiness has cost her relationship with her children. Sarah's careful composure cracked. I don't want her to be unhappy. I just want things to make sense again. They will. It'll take time, but they will. Jake's meeting was mercifully brief. He sauntered into David's office with his usual easy confidence sprawled in the chair across from the desk and grinned. So, boss, weird situation, huh? That's one way to put it, David replied, relieved by Jake's casual attitude. For what it's worth, I think you're good for her. Mom's been walking around with this smile that actually reaches her eyes. Haven't seen that since I was a kid. Thank you. That means more than you know. But if you hurt her? Jake's tone remained light, but his eyes grew serious. I know where all the electrical panels are in this building. Just saying. David laughed despite himself. Message received. The rest of the week was a careful dance of professional courtesy and personal tension. David made sure to be slightly harder on all three Kowalski siblings than he might normally be, documenting every interaction, every decision, every conversation. He avoided the break room when he knew they were there, delegated sensitive conversations to other supervisors, and maintained the kind of formal distance that left no room for accusations of favoritism. The mill workers watched it all with the intense interest of people who lived for drama in their otherwise routine lives. But gradually, as nothing explosive happened, as work continued normally, as the Kowalski children remained employed, and David remained professional, the novelty began to wear off. By Friday, the whispers had diminished to occasional curious glances. Tommy had begun nodding when he passed David in the hallways. Sarah still looked uncomfortable, but had stopped jumping every time David entered a room. Jake treated the whole situation like an amusing footnote to his otherwise uncomplicated life. How are you holding up? Maggie asked David that evening as they sat in their kitchen, sharing a quiet dinner. Better than I expected, he admitted. Your kids are handling this more professionally than I dared hope. Tommy's still angry, and Sarah's still scared, but they're both doing their jobs. And the other employees? Curious but respectful. I think the fact that we're married rather than just dating helps. Makes it clear this isn't some casual fling that'll blow over in a few weeks. Maggie reached across the table to take his hand. Any regrets? David looked at her, really looked at her, taking in the way the evening light caught the silver in her hair, the small smile playing at the corners of her mouth, the contentment in her eyes that had been absent when he'd first met her. Not a single one, he said, and meant it completely. 3 weeks had passed since the dinner disaster. and the Kowalski family existed in a state of polite, careful detente. Tommy spoke to his mother in clipped professional tones when absolutely necessary. Sarah maintained surface-level pleasantries but avoided any real conversation. Jake continued to be supportive, but even his easygoing nature couldn't bridge the growing chasm between Maggie and her older children. David had suggested they give the family space to adjust, but Maggie felt the distance like a physical ache. She'd gained a husband but seemed to be losing her children, and the trade-off felt increasingly bitter with each passing day. She was arranging the children's section at the library on a Tuesday afternoon when Jenny Morrison appeared at the circulation desk, her expression unusually serious. "Mrs. Matthews?" Jenny still stumbled over the new name. "There's someone here to see you. Says she's family." Maggie looked toward the library's entrance and felt her stomach drop. Eleanor Ellie Kowalski stood near the front door, her walker parked beside her, wearing the navy blue coat she saved for special occasions. At 82, Maggie's former mother-in-law remained formidable, sharp-eyed, silver-haired, and possessed of opinions that could cut through steel. Maggie hadn't seen Ellie since the divorce proceedings, when the older woman had surprised everyone by defending Maggie against her own son's abandonment. But this unexpected visit felt ominous, especially given the timing. "Ellie," Maggie said, approaching cautiously, "what brings you to the library?" "Don't be coy, Margaret. You know exactly why I'm here." Ellie's voice carried the authority of someone who'd raised 5 children and buried 2 husbands. "Where can we talk privately?" Maggie led her to the small conference room behind the circulation desk, her mind racing through possible reasons for this visit. Had Tommy called his grandmother for reinforcement? Was Ellie here to deliver the family's final judgment on her scandalous marriage? Ellie settled into a chair with the careful movements of advanced age but the determined expression of someone half her years. "Close the door, dear. This conversation needs to stay between us." Maggie complied, then sat across from the woman who'd been part of her life for nearly 30 years. "If this is about David, of course it's about David. The whole town's talking about nothing else." Ellie's sharp blue eyes studied Maggie's face. "Margaret Kowalski, you've got everyone in an uproar. I know it's complicated, but..." "Complicated?" Ellie let out a bark of laughter. "Honey, complicated is trying. To explain to your bridge club why your former daughter-in-law married her children's boss after 2 months of dating. What you've done is revolutionary." The unexpected word hung in the air between them. Revolutionary? Do you have any idea how many women my age are sitting in nursing homes and assisted living facilities, convinced their lives are over? How many of them believe that romance, passion, the possibility of new love, that all of that ends at 50? Maggie blinked, caught off guard by the direction of the conversation. "I hadn't really thought about..." "Of course you hadn't. You were too busy actually living to worry about what other people thought." Ellie leaned forward, her voice growing more intense. "Margaret, do you know what I told Gladys Henderson when she clucked her tongue about your inappropriate behavior?" "What?" "I told her that if she'd spent half as much energy pursuing her own happiness as she did judging other people's choices, maybe Harold wouldn't have left her for that cocktail waitress in Milwaukee." Despite everything, Maggie found herself smiling. "You didn't. I certainly did. And then I told her that you were the smartest woman in Cedar Falls for grabbing on to love when you found it, instead of letting other people's fears talk you out of it." The words hit Maggie harder than she'd expected. For weeks she'd been doubting herself, wondering if her children were right to question her judgment, if she'd acted impulsively and selfishly. "Ellie, I need you to know that I never intended for this to affect the kids' jobs, or to cause problems for the family. Stop." Ellie's voice cut through Maggie's explanation. "Stop apologizing for being happy. Stop explaining yourself to people who should be celebrating the fact that you found someone who values you. Tommy thinks I'm having some kind of crisis. Sarah's terrified about her job security. They think I've lost my mind. Have you? The direct question caught Maggie off guard. What? Have you lost your mind? Are you making decisions based on desperation or loneliness or some misguided attempt to prove something? Maggie considered the question seriously. No. I love him, Ellie. Really love him. He makes me feel like myself again, like the woman I was before I spent 25 years being what Robert needed me to be. Then that's all that matters. Ellie's voice softened. Margaret, I've been married twice. First to Tommy's grandfather, God rest his soul, and then to Frank Henderson for 15 years before he passed. I know what real love looks like, and I know what settling looks like. And? You settled for my son. You were a good wife to Robert, better than he deserved. But you were never truly happy. You were just content, making the best of things. Ellie reached across the table and took Maggie's hands. But when you talk about this David, when you say his name, your whole face changes. That's not settling, dear. That's what I had with Frank, that second chance love that catches you by surprise and reminds you that your heart isn't done yet. Tears stung Maggie's eyes. The kids don't see it that way. The kids are scared. Tommy's terrified of change, always has been. Sarah's spent her whole life trying to keep everyone happy and can't figure out how to navigate a situation where that's impossible. And Jake? Well, Jake understands better than his siblings, but he's not willing to go against them publicly. So what do? Ellie squeezed her hands. You stop asking for permission to be happy. You stop apologizing for choosing love. And you trust that your children will eventually realize that having a mother who's genuinely fulfilled is better than having one who's just dutifully miserable. What if they don't come around? Then they're fools, and you'll have to love them from a distance until they grow up. Ellie's voice was matter of fact. But they will come around, Margaret. They love you, even when they're being stubborn and self-centered. And eventually, they'll see what I see. Which is? A woman who spent 30 years being what everyone else needed and finally decided to be what she needed. A woman who chose courage over comfort, love over convenience. Ellie smiled, the expression transforming her stern features. A woman who's teaching the rest of us that it's never too late to write a new chapter. After Ellie left, Maggie sat in the empty conference room for a long time, processing the unexpected support from the woman who had every reason to judge her choices. Through the window, she could see the mill's smokestacks in the distance, where David was working, where her children were trying to navigate the complicated reality she'd created. For the first time in weeks, she felt something other than guilt about her decisions. She felt proud of choosing love, proud of refusing to apologize for her happiness, proud of showing other women, including an 82-year-old former mother-in-law, that romance didn't have an expiration date. Tomorrow she would call her children, not to apologize or explain, but to invite them to dinner, to introduce them properly to the man she'd married, to show them what authentic happiness looked like, and to trust that love, in all its complicated forms, would eventually find a way to bridge the gaps that fear had created. Tonight, though, she would go home to David and tell him about her unexpected ally, about the courage that could come from the most surprising sources, and about the family they were building together, one difficult conversation at a time. 6. Months had passed since that October evening when Maggie first created her dating profile, and the world had settled into a rhythm she never could have imagined. Spring had arrived in Cedar Falls with an explosion of wildflowers in her garden, the same chaotic mix of colors that had once made her neighbors question her sanity, but now seemed perfectly appropriate for a woman who'd chosen love over convention. The backyard barbecue had been David's idea. Let's have everyone over, he'd suggested the previous week. All of them. Your kids, Rita, Ellie, even Linda and the grandchildren. Let's stop tiptoeing around this and just be a family. Now Maggie stood at her kitchen window, watching the scene unfold in the yard she'd transformed since David moved in. He'd built raised garden beds where she could grow the herbs and vegetables she'd always wanted. The deck he'd expanded now held a proper outdoor dining set where they could host the kind of gatherings she'd dreamed of during her lonely months after the divorce. Tommy stood near the grill with David, both men focused on the careful art of barbecuing ribs. The conversation between them was still somewhat formal, but there was no hostility in Tommy's posture anymore. 3 months ago, David had approved Tommy's promotion to assistant shift supervisor, a decision made purely on merit but documented extensively to avoid any appearance of favoritism. The promotion had done more to ease Tommy's concerns than any conversation could have. "You know, he's actually pretty good with the grill," Linda said, joining Maggie at the window. Tommy's wife held baby Emma on her hip, while 5-year-old Marcus chased Jake around the yard in some elaborate game that involved superhero sound effects. "David spent years cooking for himself," Maggie replied. "He takes it seriously." "I meant Tommy," Linda said with a smile. "I've never seen him so relaxed around authority figures. Usually he gets all tense and formal. But with David, he's just himself." Through the window, they watched David say something that made Tommy laugh. Actually laugh, not the polite chuckle he used in professional settings. It was a sound Maggie hadn't heard from her eldest son in months. "He's good for all of you," Linda continued, "including Tommy, even if it took him a while to see it." The kitchen door opened and Sarah entered, carrying a pitcher of lemonade, and wearing the first genuine smile Maggie had seen from her since the marriage announcement. The workplace protocols David had implemented had gradually eased Sarah's anxiety about professional conflicts. More importantly, seeing her mother's consistent happiness had slowly worn down her resistance to the relationship. "The potato salad's a hit," Sarah announced. "Jake's already gone back for thirds." "That's my grandmother's recipe," Maggie said. "I finally got brave enough to add the extra paprika she always insisted on." "It's perfect," Sarah hesitated, then added, "Everything's perfect, Mom. Really." The simple statement carried weight beyond its words. Sarah was acknowledging not just the success of the barbecue, but the success of the choices Maggie had made, the life she'd built, the happiness she'd claimed for herself. Rita burst through the back door with her characteristic energy, carrying a covered dish and wearing a sundress that was slightly too young for her but somehow perfect anyway. "Sorry I'm late. Mrs. Patterson cornered me at the grocery store wanting to know all about the scandalous newlyweds." "What did you tell her?" Maggie asked, amused. "That she should be so lucky to have someone look at her the way David looks at you." Rita set down her dish and surveyed the scene through the window. "Speaking of which, look at this. 6 months ago you were sitting alone in this kitchen convinced your life was over, and now look." Maggie followed Rita's gaze to the yard, taking in the scene with fresh eyes. David and Tommy's conversation had been joined by Jake, who was demonstrating something with his hands that made both older men nod seriously. Sarah was setting the picnic table with Linda's help, while baby Emma babbled happily from her high chair. Marcus was now involved in an elaborate game of catch with himself, narrating his activities in the confident voice of a child who knew he was loved and safe. "It's not the family I planned," Maggie said softly. "But it's the family I have." "Better," Rita declared. "It's the family you chose." The distinction felt important. For so many years, family had been something that happened to her, something she managed and accommodated and shaped herself around. This was different. This was active choice, daily decision, the conscious creation of connection despite complications. Ellie arrived an hour later, driven by her neighbor's grandson and armed with a chocolate cake that had been the talk of her assisted living facility. At 82, she moved more slowly than she once had, but her presence still commanded attention. The children flocked to her immediately. Marcus eager to show off his latest drawings, Emma reaching for the shiny buttons on Ellie's cardigan. "Well?" Ellie announced, surveying the gathering from her chair on the deck. This is more like it. More like what? David asked, settling beside her with a plate of food. More like what family gatherings should be. People choosing to be together because they want to, not because they have to. She accepted the plate with a nod of thanks. Margaret, this is what I was talking about at the library. This is what choosing courage looks like. As the afternoon wore on, Maggie found herself moving between conversations, checking on the food, making sure everyone had what they needed. But it felt different from the frantic hostessing she'd done during her marriage to Robert. This wasn't performance or obligation. This was joy. Jake had cornered David near the garden beds, asking detailed questions about the raised planters and irrigation system David had installed. Sarah and Linda were deep in conversation about Linda's nursing program, while Tommy pushed Emma in the swing David had hung from the old oak tree. Rita and Ellie had discovered a mutual interest in scandalizing their respective social circles and were comparing strategies with obvious delight. Happy? David asked, appearing beside Maggie as she stood taking it all in. Completely. She leaned into his side, solid and warm and reassuring. Are you? No regrets about marrying into this particular brand of chaos? Look around, David said. 6 months ago, I was eating dinner alone every night, wondering if I'd ever feel connected to anyone again. Now, I have Sunday dinners with 3 generations, a garden that actually produces vegetables, and a wife who laughs at my terrible jokes. Your jokes are terrible, Maggie agreed. See, perfect match. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the yard, Tommy approached them both. His expression was serious but not hostile, the look of a man who'd made a decision and was ready to act on it. David, he said formally, then seemed to catch himself. I wanted to say something to both of you. David and Maggie waited, giving him space to find his words. I was wrong, Tommy said simply. Not about the complications, those were real, but about what mattered most. What matters most is that Mom is happy. Really happy, in a way I haven't seen since I was a kid, and if that came from marrying her boss and scandalizing the town, then good for her. Tommy, Maggie started, but he held up a hand. I'm not done. David, I want you to know that I see how you treat her, how you listen when she talks, how you ask her opinion about things, how you make room for her to be herself instead of just expecting her to fit into your life. He paused, his voice growing rougher. That's not how Dad treated her. And seeing the difference. Well, it made me realize some things about what marriage should look like. The acknowledgement hung in the air between them, complicated and honest and more valuable than any simple acceptance could have been. Thank you, David said quietly. That means everything. As the evening wound down and family members began to leave, Maggie stood in her kitchen washing dishes and listening to the sounds of her life. David loading the dishwasher, Jake's laughter from the living room where he was showing Marcus card tricks, Sarah and Tommy's voices from the deck, as they shared a final beer before heading home. Rita appeared beside her with a dish towel, falling into the familiar rhythm of their decades-long friendship. So, she said after a moment, what's next for the scandalous Mrs. Matthews? Maggie considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, her future had felt like a blank page, terrifying in its emptiness. Now it felt like a story she was actively writing, full of possibility and choice and the daily adventure of building a life with someone who truly saw her. Next, she said, I think I'll just keep being happy. Turns out it's harder than I thought, but also more worthwhile than I imagined. Revolutionary, Rita said with a grin, echoing Ellie's earlier assessment. Outside, David was securing the grill cover while Jake folded chairs and stacked them against the house. Through the window, Maggie could see the lights of Cedar Falls twinkling in the distance. the same small town where she'd lived for 30 years, but viewed now from a completely different perspective. She was still Margaret Kowalski from Cedar Falls, Wisconsin, but she was also Maggie Matthews, a woman who'd learned that second chances came in many forms, that love didn't have an expiration date, and that sometimes the most radical thing you could do was simply refuse to apologize for being happy. The mill's evening whistle blew in the distance, signaling the end of another day. But for Maggie, it felt more like a beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload. From us!